What happens when a former royal sits down with America's most outspoken talk show hosts and refuses to back down from the hard questions? The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife as Meghan Markle faced off against the panel of The View in what would become one of the most explosive interviews in daytime television history. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation that had security stepping in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered this heated exchange. The morning started like any other at The View Studios in New York City. Meghan Markle had arrived for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, discussing her latest humanitarian projects and her life after stepping back from royal duties. The producers had briefed the panel to keep things light and engaging, focusing on her charitable work and future plans. However, anyone familiar with The View knew that softball questions weren't exactly their specialty. As the cameras rolled, Whoopi Goldberg opened the segment with her characteristic directness. "We're here with Meghan Markle, and I have to say, there's been a lot of talk about your interview choices lately. Some people are saying you're being selective about who gets to ask you the tough questions." Meghan shifted in her seat, her media training kicking in as she maintained her composed smile. "I think it's important to have conversations that are productive and meaningful, Whoopi. I'm here today because I believe in the power of honest dialogue." Joy Behar leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "Honest dialogue is great, but some would argue that you've been avoiding certain topics altogether. Your relationship with the royal family, for instance, seems to be off-limits in most of your recent appearances," the studio audience murmured, sensing the immediate shift in tone. Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment before she responded. "I've been very open about my experiences, Joy. I think people sometimes mistake boundaries for avoidance." Sunny Hostin jumped in, her legal background evident in her precise questioning. "But boundaries can also be seen as selective transparency, can't they? You've spoken extensively about certain family members while remaining notably silent about others. How do you address critics who say you're controlling the narrative?" Meghan's posture straightened, and those watching closely could see her jaw tighten slightly. "I think everyone has the right to protect their own story, Sunny. The difference is that some people's stories get told whether they want them to or not." Sarah Haynes, usually the more diplomatic voice on the panel, tried to steer the conversation. "I think what we're all trying to understand is the balance between privacy and public life. You've chosen to step into certain spotlights while stepping away from others." "That's exactly right," Meghan replied, her voice carrying a slight edge now. "I've chosen to use my platform for causes I believe in, rather than feeding into tabloid speculation and gossip." Alyssa Farah Griffin, the newest panel member, sensed an opening. "But isn't there a responsibility that comes with having such a large platform? Some would argue that you can't pick and choose which aspects of your public life to address." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's media training had prepared her for difficult questions, but there was something about the collective energy of the panel that felt different from her usual controlled interview environments. She was used to sympathetic interviewers who approached her story with predetermined angles of support. "I think there's a difference between responsibility and exploitation," Meghan said, her voice growing firmer. "I'm not obligated to satisfy everyone's curiosity about my personal relationships or family dynamics." Whoopi nodded thoughtfully. "That's fair, but you've written about these relationships. You've talked about them in interviews. At what point does it become fair game for follow-up questions?" "I've shared my truth," Meghan replied, the phrase she'd used countless times before. "But sharing your truth doesn't mean you have to relitigate every detail for everyone's entertainment." Joy's eyebrows raised. "Entertainment? I think people are looking for consistency, not entertainment. When you make public statements about feeling silenced, but then you appear to be very selective about when and where you speak, it raises questions." The audience was completely quiet now, everyone sensing that this interview was heading somewhere unexpected. Meghan's calm demeanor was showing the first real cracks, and the panel could feel they were approaching something significant. "I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding here," Meghan said, leaning forward slightly. "Just because someone chooses to speak about their experiences doesn't mean they owe anyone unlimited access to their trauma or their family's private matters." Sonny's legal instincts were fully engaged now. "But when those experiences involve public figures and public institutions, don't they become matters of public interest? You've made serious allegations about racism and lack of support. These aren't just personal grievances." "They're not allegations," Meghan's voice sharpened noticeably. "They're my lived experiences. And the fact that you're calling them allegations is exactly the kind of dismissive attitude that I've been talking about." The panel exchanged glances, recognizing that they'd struck a nerve. Whoopi, with her decades of television experience, tried to diffuse the rising tension. "I don't think anyone here is trying to dismiss your experiences, Meghan. But when you bring these experiences into the public sphere, they become part of a larger conversation. A conversation that I'm apparently not allowed to control the terms of," Meghan shot back, her composure slipping further. "I came here thinking we could have a respectful discussion about my work, not to be interrogated about family matters that I've already addressed." Alyssa leaned in. "But isn't that the nature of public discourse? Once you open certain doors, people want to walk through them. You can't really control how others respond to your revelations." Meghan's eyes flashed. "I absolutely can control how I respond to invasive questioning and attempts to relitigate settled matters for television ratings." The temperature in the studio seemed to rise as Meghan's last comment about television ratings hung in the air. Joy Behar, never one to back down from a challenge, seized the moment with characteristic bluntness. "Television ratings? Meghan, you've been on every major network, every streaming platform, you've written books, you've done podcasts. If anyone understands television ratings, it's you." Meghan's face flushed slightly. "That's completely different. Everything I've done has been to share important stories and advocate for causes that matter. This feels like an ambush." "An ambush?" Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. "We're asking you questions that any journalist would ask. If that feels like an ambush, maybe the problem isn't with the questions." The audience was completely silent now, the tension so thick you could practically touch it. Sarah Haynes, still trying to find middle ground, spoke carefully. "I think what we're trying to understand is the disconnect between wanting privacy and continuing to be very public about private matters." "There's no disconnect," Meghan snapped, her professional facade crumbling. "I have the right to tell my own story on my own terms. I don't understand why that's so difficult for people to grasp." Sunny Hostin leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful but firm. "But when your story involves other people, particularly public figures, don't they have rights too? You've made some very serious accusations about the royal family, about specific individuals. They can't exactly come on television and defend themselves in the same way you can." Meghan's voice rose noticeably. "Defend themselves? They have an entire media machine at their disposal. They have palace communications teams. They have favored journalists. They have ways of getting their version out there. I had nothing but my own voice." "Your own voice and a global platform," Alyssa pointed out. "Let's not pretend you didn't. Have resources. You had Oprah, you had Netflix, you had major publishing deals. That's hardly nothing. And I earned every single one of those opportunities," Meghan fired back, her composure now completely gone. "I didn't have them handed to me because of who I married. I worked for them." Joy's expression grew incredulous. "But you did get those opportunities because of who you married. Let's be honest here. Before you were a royal, you were on a cable television show. Afterwards, you're sitting across from Oprah. That's not a coincidence." The comment hit like a physical blow. Meghan's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, and something that looked like genuine hurt. How dare you minimize my career and my accomplishments? I was a working actress. I had my own humanitarian work. I had my own identity before I ever met Harry. On a cable show that most people had never heard of, Joy continued, refusing to back down. I'm not minimizing anything. I'm being realistic about the platform that marriage gave you. Whoopi tried to interject, sensing they were approaching dangerous territory. I think what Joy is trying to say is that royal connections open doors, but what you did with those opportunities is your own achievement. But Meghan was beyond diplomatic interpretations now. No, what Joy is trying to say is that I don't deserve the platform I have, that I somehow got it through marriage rather than merit. That's exactly the kind of dismissive, reductive attitude that I've been fighting against. Sunny jumped back in, her voice steady but probing. But isn't there some truth to the fact that your royal connection amplified your voice exponentially? Before the wedding, your humanitarian work, while admirable, wasn't exactly making international headlines, because the media didn't care about that kind of work until they could use it to create a narrative, Meghan shot back. The same outlets that ignored my advocacy work for years suddenly couldn't get enough of it when they could tie it to royal drama. Sarah tried once more to find common ground. I think we can acknowledge that both things can be true. You had substance and commitment to causes, and you also gained a much larger platform through marriage. Neither diminishes the other. Except that's not how it's being presented. Meghan's voice was getting louder now, and crew members could be seen, shifting uncomfortably behind the cameras. It's being presented as if I'm some opportunist who used marriage to gain fame, rather than someone who genuinely cared about making a difference. Alyssa leaned forward. But when you left royal duties and immediately signed major media deals, how did you expect people to interpret that? The timing was, you have to admit, rather convenient. Meghan stood up slightly in her chair, her voice rising to a near shout. Convenient? You think it was convenient to leave everything behind, to face constant media harassment, to have my own family turn against me, all for some media deals? You have no idea what you're talking about. Your family that you've also been very public about criticizing, Joy pointed out. Your father, your sister, Harry's family, at what point do you take some responsibility for these fractured relationships? The question seemed to hit a nerve that went even deeper than the previous ones. Meghan's face went white, then red. Responsibility? You want me to take responsibility for other people's behavior? For their choices to speak to tabloids? To betray confidences? To sell stories about me? Maybe not for their behavior, but for your response to it, Whoopi said carefully. Going public with family disputes, that's a choice too. Going public was my only option when they were already talking to the press. Meghan's voice was shaking now with anger. I was supposed to just sit there and let them control the narrative while I said nothing? Sunny's legal training kicked in again. But there's a difference between defending yourself and launching attacks. Some of your public statements have been pretty damaging to people who can't respond in the same way. Damaging? Meghan's voice cracked slightly. What about the damage to me? What about the mental health impact of constant criticism, of having every move scrutinized, of being blamed for family dynamics that existed long before I came along? The studio fell silent for a moment, the weight of her emotion filling the space. But Joy, true to form, wasn't ready to let emotional appeals end the difficult questioning. Mental health is serious, and no one wants to dismiss that, Joy said, her voice slightly softer but still probing. But when you continue to put yourself in the public eye, when you continue to make public statements about these very issues that affect your mental health, it raises questions about your strategy. Meghan's composure snapped completely. My strategy? My strategy is to survive, to build a life for my family, to use whatever platform I have to make a positive difference. If that threatens people, if that makes them uncomfortable, that's not my problem. The panel exchanged glances, recognizing that they had pushed past the point of professional discourse into something much more raw and personal. The carefully managed public persona that Meghan had maintained throughout most of her media appearances was completely gone, replaced by someone who was clearly feeling cornered and defensive. "I don't think anyone is threatened by your success," Alyssa said carefully. "But when you make public accusations about racism, about lack of support, people want to understand the specifics. They want accountability on all sides." The word accountability seemed to be the final trigger that sent the interview spiraling completely out of control. Meghan's face went through a transformation that was visible to everyone in the studio, her carefully maintained composure replaced by raw, unfiltered anger. "Accountability," she repeated, her voice rising to a level that made the sound engineers scramble to adjust their equipment. "You want to talk about accountability? Where's the accountability for the British press that hounded me daily? Where's the accountability for family members who sold stories to tabloids? Where's the accountability for an institution that hung me out to dry?" Whoopi raised her hand slightly, trying to regain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. "Meghan, I think we need to take a step back here. This conversation has gotten very heated." "No, I'm not taking a step back," Meghan shot back, standing up from her chair. "I came here in good faith, expecting a professional interview, and instead, I'm being attacked and interrogated like I'm on trial." Joy's eyes widened at the dramatic gesture. "Nobody's attacking you, Meghan. We're asking questions that millions of people want answered. If you can't handle questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." The comment landed like a slap. Meghan's face went completely red, and for a moment it looked like she might actually walk off the set. Instead, she pointed directly at Joy. "Can't handle questions? I've been handling impossible questions and impossible situations for years, while people like you sit in judgment from your comfortable chairs." "People like me?" Joy's voice rose to match Meghan's. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means people who have never walked in my shoes, who have never faced the kind of scrutiny and harassment I've faced, telling me how I should respond, how I should behave, how I should protect my family." Meghan's voice was shaking with emotion and fury. Sunny tried to interject with her characteristic calm. "I think we're all getting a bit emotional here. Maybe we should take a commercial break and regroup." "No," Meghan snapped, whirling to face Sunny. "I'm tired of being told to calm down, to regroup, to consider other perspectives when nobody extends that same courtesy to me. You all sit here with your preconceived notions and your talking points, and you expect me to just smile and take it." Sarah made one final attempt at diplomacy. "I don't think anyone came into this with bad intentions, Meghan. Sometimes difficult conversations are necessary to get to understanding." "Understanding?" Meghan laughed bitterly. "There's no understanding happening here. This is a setup, pure and simple. You brought me here to humiliate me, to get your viral moment, to boost your ratings by tearing me down." Alyssa's patience finally snapped. "Nobody set you up, Meghan. You came on a talk show where people ask tough questions. If you expected softball questions and cheerleading, you chose the wrong show." The comment seemed to push Meghan over an edge she couldn't come back from. Her voice reached a pitch that was almost a scream. "Tough questions? These aren't tough questions. These are personal attacks disguised as journalism. You're not interested in my humanitarian work. You're not interested in my advocacy. You're only interested in drama and conflict." Whoopi stood up now too, her voice firm and authoritative. "Meghan, you need to lower your voice. We're on live television." "I don't care if we're on live television," Meghan shouted back. "Maybe it's time people saw what really happens when someone tries to speak their truth and gets attacked for it." Joy threw her hands up in exasperation. Your truth. That's all we ever hear. What about other people's truth? What about the truth of the people you've hurt with your public statements?" "I haven't hurt anyone." Meghan's voice cracked with a combination of anger and what sounded like tears. I've defended myself and my family. If that hurts people, if that makes them uncomfortable, that's because the truth often does. Sunny leaned forward, her voice still controlled but firm. But your truth has had consequences for other people. Serious consequences. Don't they deserve consideration too? Meghan spun around to face the entire panel, her arms gesturing wildly. Consequences? You want to talk about consequences? What about the consequences of staying silent? What about the consequences of letting lies and mischaracterizations go unchallenged? What about the consequences for my children of not defending their mother's reputation? The mention of her children seemed to give the panel pause, but Alyssa pressed on. Nobody wants your children to suffer, but when you make public accusations, especially about racism, you have to expect public scrutiny of those claims. Scrutiny is one thing, Meghan's voice was now hoarse from shouting. Character assassination is another, and that's what this is. You're not scrutinizing my claims, you're trying to destroy my credibility. At this point, producers could be seen frantically signaling from behind the cameras. The interview had gone so far off the rails that there was no bringing it back. Whoopi made one final attempt to salvage the situation. I think we need to end this interview now, she said firmly. This has become unproductive for everyone involved. Unproductive? Meghan's laugh was bitter and sharp. This has been very productive. It's shown exactly what I'm up against. It's shown how a woman gets treated when she refuses to be silenced or controlled. Joy stood up as well now, her own anger matching Meghan's. Nobody's trying to silence you, Meghan. You've been talking non-stop for years. What we're trying to do is have a conversation, but you're making that impossible. I'm making it impossible? Meghan's voice reached its highest pitch yet. I came here to talk about my work, my projects, my future, and you've spent the entire time relitigating my past, questioning my motives, and dismissing my experiences. Sarah made one last diplomatic attempt. I think there's been some miscommunication here. Maybe we can reschedule when everyone has had time to cool down. There won't be a reschedule, Meghan declared, grabbing her purse from beside her chair. I'm done with this kind of treatment. I'm done with being expected to smile while being attacked. Security personnel had begun moving closer to the set, sensing that the situation was escalating beyond what could be handled by the hosts alone. Whoopi noticed their presence and made a subtle gesture. I think it's best if we end this now, she said firmly. Thank you for coming, Meghan. Don't thank me, Meghan shot back, her voice still carrying across the studio as security began to approach. This interview is exactly why people don't trust media anymore. You pretend to want honest conversation, but what you really want is blood in the water. As security gently but firmly began to escort her from the set, Meghan continued talking, her voice echoing through the studio. This is what happens when you try to control the narrative instead of seeking truth. This is what happens when you prioritize ratings over respect. The cameras continued rolling as she was led away, capturing every moment of what would become one of the most talked-about television meltdowns in recent memory. The panel sat in stunned silence for several seconds, before Whoopi finally addressed the camera. We'll be right back after this commercial break, she said, her professional composure intact despite the chaos that had just unfolded. The interview that was supposed to rehabilitate Meghan's image had instead created a viral moment that would be analyzed and debated for weeks to come. Her complete loss of composure, her inability to handle challenging questions, and her dramatic exit had revealed a side of her that even her harshest critics hadn't expected to see so clearly. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Was the panel too harsh in their questioning, or was Meghan's reaction completely over the top? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.